chat. And without anything else, I'll turn it over to you, Chantal.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here with me at 9 a.m. on a Friday. I appreciate it. So we're gonna jump in, and this is an interactive training. We're gonna use something called Slido. So if you have your cell phones, you'll wanna have those handy. And just have like discussion throughout the presentation, and then I will definitely be available at the end if people have specific like education related questions about young people who you're working with or your children. So we'll jump in. Is this okay? Let's see. Okay, so this well, it's just a title slide, but the name of the report and the research that I'm reporting on really deals with what our schools, what our agencies, what our state agencies need to do to support students in the foster system. And we'll kind of jump in to a little more about what that means as we go through the presentation. So we're gonna have a little time to get to know each other, you getting to know me getting to know who's all in the room. We'll talk about the problem, we'll talk about the research that I conducted, the policy solutions, and how you can help make change, and then we'll have time for questions. So about me, just a little bit about me. I'm a policy researcher and advocate at the Century Foundation, which is a think tank based in the city. I also was in a fellowship at Next 100, which is housed at the Century Foundation. And Next 100 is a startup think tank really centered around getting people with lived experience and those in proximity to communities with lived experience at the policy table. So really sort of narrowing that divide between the people who make policy and the people who are affected by policy. I'm an attorney by training. I practiced for 10 years and I have worked in and adjacent to the foster system and education systems for most of the time I practiced. My primary role was as an education attorney for young people in the foster system in New York City. So lots of fighting for services for students with disabilities, lots of trying to prevent punitive discipline measures like suspensions, and also lots of work just trying to get access for students in the foster system to make sure that they could get to school, they weren't getting kicked out for reasons that had nothing to do with anything, and that they were being adequately supported. So with that, we're gonna do a little Slido. So you can scan this, and this is for the people online too, you can do it too, you can scan your computer. So you can scan that QR code and just answer this quick question: what's your relationship to young people in the foster system? As you answer, we'll see the different descriptions pop up. So it's just good to know who's in the room. So I've shared who I am, so it's good to know who everyone is. Let's see, is there something in the chat? Oh, nice, education liaison. So whoever is the education liaison, maybe this is all old news for you, but I hope you'll learn something new. This is great. This is super.
She's our own boss.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I was like, there's obviously some connection. We got a couple folks still scanning and typing. If you can't scan, you can also type in the website and do that. Put in the code there, but it's great. It looks like we have like a great mix of folks. We have some casework, a chef. I love that. Two of my best friends are chefs. In fact, one of them is on the call now. But I love that we have such a wide variety of folks here who can really, I hope, learn from this research and begin to, partner and become advocates in this work that we're doing. So I'm gonna move on. And we're gonna jump into, okay.
No one did it. No, I don't know how to use these iPhones.
We'll have another opportunity to use Slido at the end too. So this won't be your only chance. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna show a quick video which kind of previews the research, and then we're gonna dive into it. I'm Chantal Hinds. I'm a policy entrepreneur at Next 100, a startup think tank in New York City. I focus on issues at the intersection of the foster system and education in New York State, trying to improve educational outcomes for young people experiencing foster care. So at Next 100, I've been working on research about improving educational outcomes for young people in the foster system. My experience personally has been working as an education advocate for young people in New York City in the foster system. And over time, I just began to see the challenges that these young people were facing in terms of getting through school well, getting through to graduation, and ultimately going on to college if that's what they wanted to do. So when I came to Next 100, I really wanted to focus on improving policy around supporting these youth and these young people. And for me, what that looked like was this major project of centering the voices of people with lived experience, interviewing current and former foster youth, foster parents, and finding out what can our state be doing differently? What can our schools be doing differently? What can our agencies be doing differently to support the educational needs of young people in the foster system? Because we're not doing a great job right now. And in order to improve it, it's my firm belief that we have to ask the people who have experienced it.
Hi, my name is Milka Slater. I'm 28 years old. I was in foster care for about 6 to 8 years, and I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York.
My name is Christina Young. I'm 27 years old. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, but I currently reside in the Bronx, and I was in the foster care system for 7 years. I would like to describe myself. I would say that I'm a foster care alumni ambassador. I'm really into just fighting for foster youth rights after foster care. I'm a law school student, fun, outgoing, things like that.
What I find challenging about navigating foster care in school was ensuring that I had a stable home, a stable bed, communicating with my social workers about like the home, how is the foster parents.
I would say it was challenging. I would say like just navigating school, like understanding like schoolwork, especially being in a foster care system, you don't have a lot of like supports. So, you know, like as like family, right? Like you get someone to like do your homework with you if you're like having difficulties and things like that, like it's put on the youth itself, like not having enough support. So I would definitely describe it as challenging and difficult.
It's important for people with lived experience to share their stories because they're the experts. I think oftentimes in all parts of society, but particularly in the child welfare and foster systems, a lot of people from high levels without experience are making decisions about people's lives, and they don't actually know what it is to live that experience. So I think it's critical for people with lived experience to speak their truth, their experiences, and their recommendations for change, because they're really the experts on the issue.
So some of the supports I wish that I had while being in school was someone to just guide me. I would say, especially with like extracurricular like activities, tutoring, things like that, like just like an advocate of like the services that I needed. I kind of felt like in school I taught myself.
One way my school could have helped me while I was in high school is offer more mental health services like therapy. Also getting to know my talents, my aspirations, and matching that to resources where I can actually build upon that.
What I've learned from talking to people with lived experience about what our foster system needs to do different, what our education needs to do different, a couple of things come to mind. The first is training. From all the conversations I had with people who participated in these interviews and focus groups, the fact that school staff, the fact that even agency staff in some cases don't understand the foster system experience was top of mind for a lot of people. Number two is tutoring. A lot of people mentioned just having additional academic support, whether that's from the agency or within their schools it was critical in actually helping them achieve their goals. Number 3 would be collaboration. A lot of people noted just how our education system, our child welfare / foster system, they don't communicate. And just ensuring that there's more communication between those agencies so that kids don't fall through the cracks, so that students get the supports they need, so that somebody is aware and paying attention about what they need, about the credits that they've accumulated, about the credits they still need, and is what's happening at home showing up in school and vice versa, and how can we really put wraparound supports around the student. All right, so that's a little preview of what we're going to talk about. So I'll just do some table setting here, which we have like a lot of people who are experienced in the room, so I don't need to do a lot of heavy lifting here, but I'll just kind of like preview some of this really I'll touch on it lightly. But according to statewide data, we have about 8,100 students in the foster system statewide. I'm pretty sure this number is an undercount. The way that data gets reported in the state is that it relies on the local school district staff. So the school has to be informed about who's in the system, and then that gets reported up to the state. So if they don't get that notification, it doesn't get entered into the system. We can have a whole other data discussion if anybody's interested about why that actually doesn't have to be that way, but that's the way it is. And about 40% of these students are in elementary school. So there's a good chunk of students in the foster system who are really in the prime of their educational experience and really are going through really difficult life challenges just by virtue of being uprooted from their family. And in a new environment in the system. Graduation rates, which many of you may know, are pretty sad for students in the foster system. Only about 51% of students graduated in August 2023. The overall graduation rate for all students was 86%. Students in the foster system were 3.5 times more likely to leave school without graduating compared to all students, and they were over 3 times more likely to remain enrolled in school. So they're not graduating and then they're leaving without graduating. I use that term instead of dropout just because I think it kind of indicates that there's some sort of disconnect that happened where the student decided like, I don't want to show up here anymore. So this is just an indication of the problem. When we look at those younger grades and we look at like ELA assessment data and math assessment data, I calculated these numbers based on the ELA and state tests, and about 25% were proficient in ELA. 24% were proficient in ELA, and about 25% proficient in math. This is looking at 3rd through 8th graders as a group. These numbers obviously post-COVID, right? Like everybody's struggling, but pre-COVID, the numbers were not significantly better. They were worse. So like it's just bad all the way around. So we're just seeing a lot of challenges with this student population. And I also wanted to highlight a data report from Advocates for Children of New York, which is a legal services organization in the city, highlighted some important data points about students in the city, which is that over 40% of them are students with disabilities. Between the 16-17 and 2021 school years, roughly half were chronically absent. So they were missing a good chunk of time in school. And then pre-pandemic, New York City students in the foster system were suspended at almost 4 times the rate of all students. So you have a lot of significant challenges in the ways that these students are being received and perceived in school, and a lot of work that I think we all need to do together to make sure that they're supported well. What, if anything, you can guys share in the chat or online or in person? Did anything surprise you about this data, or is this stuff folks already were aware of?
No, it validates what I already know. I'm a special education advocate, and all those points you made are spot on.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Will you repeat just so they hear?
I'm sorry. Oh, repeat it. Oh, what, if anything? Sorry, repeat what you said. Sorry. We have an education advocate in the audience who said that it validates everything she already knew.
So we were sidebar that the percentage of children with those disabilities was lower than we expected, but I'm thinking that it's it's because if there's chronic absenteeism, the school's going to push back when you request an eval saying they're not here long enough, we can't assess them, or to just say like, we're not going to do it. So I wonder how much that impacts that percentage of children that do have disabilities.
That's that's really.
That actually happened with a youth that I work with. That was the primary reason that they denied it. And I said, okay, but maybe they're not coming because they need more support, and they feel so discouraged that they just gave up.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And a lot of the time too, I've had almost my entire caseload has come in with no services, and by the time they leave my caseload, that almost everyone has a 504 IEP because nobody knew to request it, or nobody bothered to request
Or
it.
nobody knew that the school can't say no when it's in writing. I'm the educational liaison. I work in the county that she works in.
Got it.
They can't say no. We have timelines.
Got it. Yes, timelines, my favorite. I will just repeat that for the folks online. Just a note here from an education advocate and caseworker that sometimes students in the foster system are under-identified, and schools don't want to actually provide services when students are actually entitled to them, blaming things like attendance and things of that nature. Yes.
Okay, so statistically, 40% is very high for disabilities. Is there a reason that you think that it's that high? And have you done any assessment on the other end of the spectrum? Perhaps those that are chronically absent, is it out of boredom?
So I have not done any like official research, but I can tell you anecdotally from my work, like actually doing the work. So I think a couple things are happening. Sorry, the question was that the number of students with disabilities seems high, and have I kind of done any work around chronic absenteeism and why students aren't showing up. So I think that the number of students with disabilities who are in the foster system, that number is very high, because in the general populations, I think it's about 13%. In my work, we thought it was more like 50%. And when I was working in the city, just based on the numbers we were looking at, I think there's two things happening. And this is my educated guess. I think that there's under-identification and over-identification. So it's under-identification in the sense that you have students who have real disabilities and they're just not getting identified for reasons like the folks here mentioned. But you also have over-identification because you have issues where students, you know, have had chronic absenteeism, maybe have had interrupted education, and then we don't have a structure here to support a student in that position. It's the same thing with like migrant students who don't have formal education or have interrupted formal education. The only process to get extra support in this country is really through the special education process. So you kind of end up having kids identified who just really need extra support, but may not really, truly have a disability, even though they may test that way, if that makes sense. Because if you have big gaps in your learning, how can you adequately do a psychoeducational evaluation? How can you show that you understand information when you just don't have the building blocks? So I think it's a mixed bag, and there has to be a lot more research there to figure out why that's like that. It also happens with Black students.
Just a quick aside to go with that follow-up. When do they do the testing on the students when they come to school to see if they have a disability with foster kids? Is it like the first day they come?
It's by request. It's only by request, by parent request.
For placement in classes,
So usually schools can do testing when a student starts a new school to figure out what grade to put them in, a screening, but there is no like sort of universal disability testing that happens. It only happens upon request. So a teacher can request, a parent can request, a foster parent can request, an agency can request. Now the parent is the one who has to sign to get that process started and sign for services, but other people can bring that concern to the school. So I'm gonna do one more question and then we're gonna continue.
Well, I have a question, but one of the things I've seen happen in the system why a lot of kids are not tested is the movement within the system. Sometimes they're not in a home long enough. They may start the process and then move. And they start the process and they move. So that is part of the reason why some of them are not tested, because I've seen it happen with families I've worked with a lot of times. They're not able to get the child in the program because they haven't been any place long enough.
Right.
To be tested, especially when they pass a certain age, then that's not going to happen. So a lot of times that's in the absenteeism. sometimes it's for the same reason.
Yeah,
For
the
same-
instability.
For the same reason, including sometimes the agencies with their medical and psychological other appointments are not conducive to children not missing school. I think they're doing a better job of late, but earlier on, all appointments were made during the day when no kids should have been in school. So that added to the absences.
Great point,
I
great
just,
point.
I just wanted to make a comment that I did a virtual training workshop last week that I think everybody's able to access. And it was called Advocating for Your Child, and it goes through the special education process. So if anyone here wants to do that, because it really does give the legalities. And then I also have a table out there where it does exactly that. I have sample letters that you write to the school district and you just plug it in. So for anybody that wants that, yeah.
Excellent.
That was exceptional.
Yes, thank you for your work. I'm just gonna check the chat here. Curious to see data on the same student cohort before entering care. Yeah, that's a, thank you, Chris, in the chat. That's a really interesting question. I think that gets to this issue of longitudinal data collection. Some states have it, our state does not have it in that way. So it's kind of hard to track someone sort of through their life and different experiences, but it is something that I've recommended the state do. So I'm gonna push us forward to get into more of this, and we'll have more time for discussion. So what was the research? You heard me kind of summarize it in the video, but I did interviews and focus groups with folks, youth, parents, and foster and adoptive parents about how our schools and foster care agencies can better serve our young people. Where were the participants from? It was very New York City heavy. I want to say that out at the outset because that is an important sort of way to understand this data. But we did have representation from Western New York, the Southern Tier, and the Hudson Valley. That is very much so thanks to AFFCNY, who I shared my research with, and then who shared it out with the network. I think we have to do more research to capture more of what's happening outside of downstate and really figure out what's happening in these other school districts. New York City is obviously an anomaly for a bazillion different reasons. But when you get into, as I heard from some parents in the Southern Tier or Western New York, the individual school districts have a lot of power and are making a lot of decisions that are not in our young people's best interest, and there is not the same sort of advocacy structure and power there. So one thing that we can also talk about at the end, if folks are interested, let me know. I'm really thinking about and trying to seek funding to start a statewide advocacy coalition because I think we all need to get together and demand that the state do better. And the only way we can do that is if the whole state gets on board. It can't just be New York City doing their thing or our thing in the city. What about everybody else? Like, we got to figure it out for everyone. So that's just a taste of where folks are from. So here are some demographics. About 73% of folks identified as female in the survey. 52 were current and former foster youth. The average age was about 25. We did have a couple of outliers. There were 3 people who were over 30, but the vast majority of people were in there like 20 to 30. So people had fairly recent experience in the system. 12 were foster adoptive parents and 11 were parents. This is the race ethnicity background. It skewed Black, African American. We also had good representation from folks who identified as Hispanic or Latino. We had folks who identified as Black and Hispanic. Other includes just folks who identified various ways. When I did this survey, I didn't put boxes, I just let people describe themselves however they wanted to. So other includes things like Guyanese or half Black, half white, or things like that. And then we had 6% who identified as white or Caucasian. Just a note about language. I know I use the term Latino here, and that's because that's how folks self-identified, but it's not meant to be an exclusionary term. So I just want to share a couple findings. So you'll see at the end, I include a QR code so you can scan the report, and a QR code so you can sign up, or I can email it to you. You can do it either way. But the report shares a lot of the findings and also quotes from folks who so graciously spent time talking to me, a perfect stranger, and just shared their stories. And I'm so grateful for everyone who participated. And we included their quotes anonymously in the report, just to give people a sense of what's actually happening on the ground. So we'll go through a couple findings for each group. So current and former foster youth parents and foster adoptive parents, and then kind of talk about them in turn. So about 1 in 4 current and former foster youth reported having a supportive relationship regarding their academics with their foster parent. That meant encouragement about the importance of education, support during homework time, and support with any school transitions. One participant said, she would always tell me to go to school, get your education. No one can take your education. And so she told me that almost every day. Even now when we talk, she's like, you got your education. My foster parent always supported me. And I want to share, like, these findings are not mutually exclusive, meaning that these youth, as we kind of have already touched on, have had so many different experiences, so many different placements. So a lot of people are saying, yeah, it was positive in this instance, but negative in this instance. So just keep that in mind as you think about these numbers. These represent like a wide variety of experiences for sometimes the same foster youth. So in terms of, so other things they reported, 1 in 4 reported that they didn't feel supported in their academics, whether that was lack of homework help, like we heard from Christina in the video, lack of support for attending college, overall just lack of interest in their education and well-being. Someone said, I think foster parents is kind of hands-off in terms of like, even like helping you with your homework. Honestly, it's kind of like either you get it or you don't. So that was a really, unfortunate experience folks have had. 1 in 5 reported maltreatment by their foster adoptive parents, including lack of appropriate clothing and food, physical, sexual, and mental abuse, and lack of caring about their well-being. Someone said, I have to go to school with either the same clothes or I have to figure out how to mix and match. That was always my biggest problem with school, like not wanting to go to school because I didn't have the proper attire. I can excel in the classroom, but I don't know if I'm going to be picked on because I had the same shirt I had on yesterday. And these are things like my point when I do this work because I was I started my career as an attorney for ACS very early in my legal career. And I quickly discovered that that was not the kind of lawyer I wanted to be. And I've been on this side now, like trying to support and advocate for young people for many years now. And what's striking to me is like, these are kids whom the state has, local commissioner of social services has deemed cannot be in their home for safety reasons. And then we put them into a system and effectively abandon them. And you all are at a conference about this, so I'm clearly not talking to you guys, but it's striking to me that this is the kind of experience that people can have when they're supposed to be safe and they're supposed to be well cared for. Often kids are ending up in a worse position having been in the foster system. I'm sure folks have heard of the foster care to prison pipeline. There's a foster care to homelessness pipeline. Like, what are we doing is the thing that is always echoing in my head. So when we talk about school experiences, about 1 in 3 reported one school change while in the foster system, and about 1 in 2 reported more than one school change. So significant instability. And I mentioned the ages because there have been various laws passed over the years to kind of prevent the school instability, but people are still reporting it, even people who were in their early 20s. So the law has been passed since they exited the system, they still reported some instability. Someone said it was very awkward to start over in a new school. You get used to one school for so long and then you switch and you have to do it all over again. You're starting over as the new kid, the outcast. And it's not even with guidance counselors and teachers there to give you support. You don't really know any of them yet to be so open and be like, okay, I can come to them if I have any problems. And I think we rely on our school staff, like, and I push, on school staff in this report to do more. But this is a reality of the dynamic too here. And we're just gonna hold questions just for a little bit, just to get through the section of findings. 1 in 4 reported a positive experience with their school knowing about their placement. Once school staff were aware of their placement in the foster system, this group of folks reported that they were treated with compassion, they were offered support and understanding of how the system experience might impact them on any given day. Someone said some teachers/school staff knew I was in the foster system. Yes, some knew and some didn't. It was helpful at least at least they know that I'm in the foster care system, so things are a little hard for me. So they actually helped me out a little bit with it. If I was struggling a lot in school because of my placements and foster care stuff. So compassion went a long way. So many current and former foster youth are like, I just want someone to care about me. I just want someone to care. I just want someone not to be like on my back if I show up to school in a way that maybe isn't my best self because I just missed a visit with my parent or I was moved in the middle of the night. Like, what do you want? How do you want me to show up to school? Like, compassion was a key thing that folks shared. Nearly 1 in 2 reported helpful relationships with at least one school staff member during their school experience. And that ranged from teachers to guidance counselors, college and career staff, principals, staff from community-based organizations for those students who were in community schools. Someone talked about their high school teacher who would check up on them and decided to tutor them. And that was the person who really helped this participant really stay engaged in school because, again, someone showed interest and someone cared. Nearly 1 in 4 reported unhelpful relationships with at least one school staff member. This could include just a lack of understanding or awareness or interest in their home lives, general discouragement, lowered expectations, or lack of confidentiality. The issue of teachers sort of telling the whole school that the student was in the foster system came up a lot, just teachers not being confidential. And someone noted that even when schools tried to support, it wasn't necessarily as helpful. This person pondered, if I was a social worker in school and they saw a kid didn't have a coat, they would be on it and be like calling their social worker at the agency and figuring out what's going on. This participant noted like they never felt like there was enough energy for them from school staff. So moving on to agency experiences, about 75% of folks reported that they had more than one foster placement. And then this next number has a lot of caveats, but about 40% reported that they had multiple placements ranging from 2 to 63. There were 4 outliers of significant placement changes between 20 and 63 changes. However, when we removed those, the average number of placements was 4. So I know that that's a large number, that's why I explained it. But 4 placement changes is a lot. And we kind of, I don't know, those who were in the neuroscience presentation yesterday with the doctor from Columbia, Nim Tottenham, she talked about that like early life instability, and it just made me think about this number and like what folks are dealing with. About 1 in 3 reported that their agency or social services departments were unhelpful. About 1 in 4 reported helpful relationships with their agency staff. So more folks feeling unsupported than supported. Someone said, my education counselor was great. So shout out to education counselors. She helped me out. She cared so much. She was always fighting for us. She was the only person that I really had a connection to at that agency. And I thought that was really, really beautiful, and that person shared that. About 1 in 3 reported that their agencies provided them with academic support. That could be tutoring. And that happened in both foster home and congregate care settings. There is a whole section of this report that talks about what it's like to be in congregate care, namely residentials people were talking about, but a couple of folks talked about group homes. And overwhelmingly, people were not happy with those experiences. So I think there's a lot that we need to think about there in terms of eliminating those as options, or until they are eliminated, improving the experience for young people there. Smaller numbers of current and former foster youth, about 3 to 4, reported receiving mental health and post-secondary support from their agencies. Because this training is about resilience, I asked questions about how people coped, how they make it through. And despite significant foster system and school challenges, current and former foster youth shared how they coped through becoming their own advocates, so self-advocacy, positive relationships with family, attorneys, and social workers, support from faith communities, support from friends, mental health supports, and diving into school as an escape. So people were able, despite the challenges, to really find points of resilience to get through. So we'll just pause here to take a few questions. What, if anything, surprised you or did you find interesting about the findings? Yes.
I think that in foster care, one of the, well, I just want to say this, we have such a heightened increase in mental health, but mental health with birth parents. And that directly impacts the services that can be given to the children. There is so much back and forth that could go on for years. In the meantime, the child isn't getting what they need. Okay, because the bio parents still have rights, and so the child doesn't get what they need. So even when you do the IEPs, because in working with foster parents, I let them know that they can write that letter requesting it. What has to happen though, the parent has to sign off or agree to it. And that's where the fight becomes, because for most part, the agencies are very lax in even asking for an override. Because you can see, anytime the judge don't want the parent in their courtroom, because the parent is that mentally instability, the instability there, then why would you allow the child to just dwindle without services? So you have kids that have to go to the hospital all the time but then hospitals send them right back home. They're not getting help from nobody, because once they find out they can't get consent, nobody wants to be bothered. And this is happening to a great number of our children. Okay. One of the other,
Give her a moment to recap that for the.
Yeah, I just got to recap for the people online. So the comment made here was about just the challenge it is to get services for young people with parents who maybe aren't able to consent or don't want to consent to services for young people. I think so. What you're mentioning is going to come up in a second when we talk about parents and foster parents. So I'll be curious to get your thoughts after that. There is provision in the law to go to court and ask for what you're calling an override, but what is really to designate the foster parent as a surrogate parent. However, that's really in extreme circumstances. And having worked with lots of parents and lots of foster parents, I can say even in many of my cases, even the parents who were like really opposed, taking them on the journey of understanding what special education is and what it's not had worked really well for me over time. But there are definitely situations where you may need to use the courts as a recourse. Anybody else? Yes.
One thing I found interesting was for those of us in the room that are foster adoptive parents that really work very hard for our children every day, and I'm also a teacher. It's a slap in the face when we hear about foster homes that aren't doing those things, and it's heartbreaking, and we want to burst into tears. And I would love to be involved with the statewide advocacy coalition if you can forward information on Long Island. And it's actually one of the ways I became a foster parent after having a child in my class that I saw just wasn't getting some of the same things. Like, what's going on with Picture Day? Why can't he come on the field trip? And I stayed home from work one day and saw a commercial and called and just wanted more information. And here I am. It's heartbreaking, and we want to not see that because there are those of us, and even as teachers, I hear that they say, "Oh, the school doesn't," but our hands are tied a lot of the times. The process is more difficult to get kids services. There's a lot of time they want documented before we can get kids into special education, because they don't want us just throwing kids in, who might just just need a little bit more support.
Right.
So it's a long process, and if kids are moving around, if they're not showing up at school, then we don't know if they need services or if they just need more consistent time. So there's a lot more things that we can do advocacy wise in terms of seeing if these kids can get support. Sometimes they need support, not necessarily services
Intervention
per se. Exactly. So that's where there's a fine line there. It's not that when we see kids that really need help, we want to get them help, but it's a process. It's a long process now. There's a lot of documentation, and it can take a few years. They want to see a lot of data now. There's a lot of things we have to do just to get kids something basic like speech services. It can take more than a school year. And it's not because they're not being screened when they come in. It's because we need to know why. It was an interruption in education. Was there this? Was there that?
Mhm.
So there's a lot of different pieces coming together.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and to your point, sorry, I'll just repeat for the audience, just the idea that school staff really do want to see students get supported, really do want to get them their services, and particularly make sure that students in the foster system get everything they need. To your point about just the process, the other thing that is true is every school district has a different like sort of preliminary process, right? The IDEA is the IDEA, and that is going to be the law of the land regardless. But schools build different policies and structures around how to get from point A to point B. There may, I won't say probably, there may be ways that the school is like actually lengthening the process when they shouldn't be legally, right? So I think like that's a whole other point and a whole other question about like how do we do that. So I'm gonna pause on questions in the room just really quick and just take a look at the chat and just see, as one of those youth in the focus groups. Right. So yes, as I said before, Jeanette, I know you're noting that Southern Hudson Valley is hardly Hudson Valley. And yeah, so I did my best to try to connect with partners across the state. So this research, like I said, should be interpreted in light of the fact that it is limited to a certain group of people. However, I think that all voices matter and are important. And I think that these voices have something to say and tell us a story. But I do think that there's room to do additional research in other parts of the state to really hear what's going on there. So if you have suggestions, Jeanette, I would love to connect with you on that. Were all of the participants adopted, APLA, or did any of the youth return to their birth families? Some of the youth who participated did reunite with their families. All right, so we're gonna jump because I want to make sure to get to parents and foster parents. So these are some select findings about parents and their school experiences. Nearly all parents reported challenges with school stability while their children were in the foster system. 6 parents reported that they had no input in determining if their child changed schools or which schools they went to and if they changed schools at all. One parent talked about her child changing daycare multiple times, so she was much younger, and how she didn't know at any point in time really where she was, that her child was put in a Catholic daycare program and she didn't want her to be in a Catholic daycare program. So a lot of just eliminating parent voice in school. Another person said the educational coordinator didn't reach out to her and the agency kind of just did what they wanted. Parents also, about 1 in 2 parents reported that they had negative experiences when attempting to remain involved in their child's education. And that's centered mainly around schools failing to keep parents updated about their child's academic progress and any needs they may have had. One parent said, but they have not included me in parent-teacher conferences. They had said that there was no way they could include me, which is not true. And because of ACS, things that were put in place. But yes, there was no kind of effort to include me in any kind of educational activities for my child. They really didn't respect anything when it came to me.
Which parents were those?
I'm sorry.
Which parents are you talking about?
These are, I don't use the term birth or bio parent, so these are who you would ordinarily call birth or bio parent. About 1 in 2 reported that they were engaged in their child's education by completing homework during visits or reading to their children, playing educational games, and keeping up to date with their school progress. This is just a little story about how a parent during visits, the first thing she would do is like break out the homework and just keep up to date with them about their education because they weren't getting updates otherwise. And then I'll share this PowerPoint so you could read it more in detail, and this is all in the report. So when it came to agencies, parents said more than half reported feeling like their foster care agency was inconsiderate of their thoughts, need for information, and in some cases even restricted their access to information about their children's education. Parents shared that their foster care agencies failed to share where their children were attending school, provide updates about how their children were doing in school, or help with explaining any concerns or interventions that were recommended by the school. That could be evaluations and services to address unmet academic needs. So I just want to say right here really quickly is that even in cases where there are orders of protection in place, sometimes we have those cases where there are orders of protection in place to prevent parents from going to the school. That still doesn't mean that they don't get to know how their kids are doing in school. And that's something that we worked a lot on at my old job, is just really figuring out like, okay, you can't share where they go to school, but you can share a redacted report card that just shows the grades. Like you can have you know, figure out a way to maybe have a phone call, or maybe these days even a virtual meeting, to at least open that line of communication. About 1 in 3 reported that foster parents kept them informed about their child's school progress and that it was helpful. Foster parents, in some cases, provided updates to parents about any challenges their children were having in school, involved them during homework time by phone, and shared information about their children's overall school progress. There was one story in particular from a parent who had been reunified with her children, and she just said, like, the way the foster parent approached her child being in care was sort of like, the school doesn't need to really know the details. So it's sort of like, I'm just kind of like an auntie or something watching them while you know, for a while. And she just like would call her when the kids were doing homework, if they were being, you know, whatever, disruptive, to try to get them back on task, and just really partnered with her. And the partnership part that both foster parents and parents talked about really highlighted some successful ways that people can work together. And I think ultimately work towards families, towards supporting reunification in a really helpful way. Education can kind of be a vehicle to that end. Anything anybody want to share about the parent findings before I jump into foster parents? Check the chat. How can we help get involved? Yeah, so we will share, we'll talk about how we can get involved. And then, okay, Tracy, I am going to follow up with that after. So we're going to jump into foster parent findings. And these are select findings. There's much more in the report, so you can see more in the report. But for foster or adoptive parents, when it came to school, about 1 in 2 shared that shared their challenges with schools providing the appropriate support to address children's behavioral challenges and needs. Schools often overreacted to behaviors, failed to understand trauma, and were unable to provide needed behavioral supports and de-escalation strategies. Someone said, I remember one day my adopted child was getting detention or almost suspended because they went through double doors and like karate kicks the door open. I definitely think she was seen as like the older, poor, troubled foster youth and kind of just had a target on her back. Some of those behavioral things, like, yeah, they're stupid things that maybe you shouldn't do in class. I think some of the consequences were blown out of proportion in that setting, which was a suburban school specifically. So this kind of gets to, you know, we kind of looked at the sort of overrepresentation and suspension in the city. This particular parent was out in Western New York and kind of was noting some of the same things. About 1 in 2 foster adoptive parents reported involvement with their foster children's school, including advocating for school stability, participating in school meetings or conferences, advocating for special education services, and sharing insights about a child's behavioral support needs. One foster adoptive parent said, and I will also say to them, the school, you know, I'm giving you this information, so, you know, a few months down the road, don't call me with an incident. You know, I mean, I'm giving you this information proactively. So you're not going to call me in a few months and say, guess what happened? No, we're not doing that. You're not suspending my foster child because I'm telling you. What was really interesting and beautiful, but also frustrating about conversations with foster and adoptive parents was so many of the parents, like if you participate in a survey in a focus group like this, you are someone who is interested and active in these things. And so many were like going at it alone and like going up to the school and like fighting and pushing and saying like, no, you're not, like, I know my rights. I know this child's rights. Like, you're not gonna just like railroad them. And the agency was like nowhere to be found in terms of providing additional support. They were not connected to different advocacy organizations. And I was inspired by the tenacity of so many of the foster and adoptive parents I spoke to, but also frustrated that there are all these professionals who are around who should also be supporting them. They shouldn't have to be, you know, dealing with what they're dealing with alone. 1 in 3, yes.
You know, and you said it at the beginning, and I'm so excited that you want this advocacy thing, because I'm like beyond fed up with the education system in this state right now. But you would say, and from my experience as a special education advocate and a lot of kids in the foster care system, yeah, they do have a target on their back. But you said it at the beginning, I really think there should be mandated, and I'll specify mandated trainings for all school personnel to attend to understand the foster care and adoptive system. Mandated from your school administrators, from the top all the way down to your bus drivers, to your cafeteria workers, to everybody, that this should be mandated. And part of the reason to do that too is because then you get other people in that huge system that might have been foster or adopted, and they might not know it because they don't know what they don't know. Trust me on that. No one ever told me that Johnny had an IEP. Nobody ever told me, and that's that's the problem. So that education mandated should just happen.
Yeah.
Because I'm done with it, because that one mother who said, I told you why suspension, when the other kids who are not foster kids do not get suspended for that kind of behavior. And kids are kids.
Yep.
I'm
Kids
so
are
done
kids.
with 6 and 5-year-olds getting suspended for being 6 and 5-year-olds, especially now when during COVID they had no experience whatsoever with social anything.
Yeah,
So,
you're absolutely right.
I'm done.
Yeah. So we had a comment in the room about mandating training and support. Mandating training for school staff. Everyone from the teacher to the principal to the school bus driver to the cafeteria worker, and just making sure that that's important so people understand experience. So I'm going to jump through this next two, and then we'll have some time for discussion around the foster adoptive parent experience. So 1 in 3 reported engaging the child's parents in their child's education and overall establishing a relationship with the parents. So again, this is foster adoptive parents to bio parents. These foster parents spoke positively overall about their efforts to work collaboratively with parents to keep them informed about their child's academic progress and needs. Foster parents discussed partnering with parents to ensure homework was completed during visits or working collaboratively to ensure that a child receives special education services. Foster parents also discussed working with parents generally to provide overall support in a co-parenting model to promote a continued parent-child relationship. However, establishing a positive relationship can be difficult due to negative perceptions or frustrations parents have towards the foster parent. There were many instances, like I mentioned, I previewed a slide or two before, where both foster parents and parents just talked about how effective it was when there was a co-parenting model in place, where the foster parent was coming alongside the parent and willing to work with them. And we'll see a little bit later in the recommendations, though, that in order for that to be successful, sometimes relationships aren't getting off the ground positively because the agency is not helping with a positive introduction or helping establish a working relationship. There's an interesting model, co-parenting model out of Rising Ground in the city. That is a program that's run by a licensed marriage and family therapist who has experience working with parents who are divorced. So she applies some of those same principles to working with foster and adoptive parents. And I think it's really interesting work. They got a grant to do it. I don't know how long it'll keep going, but I can share some information with anyone who's interested about that. More than half of the foster and adoptive parents reported that their foster care agency or social services departments were unhelpful when it came to issues related to their foster home and education in their homes. They reported that local agency staff failed to ensure a proper, like I mentioned, proper introduction and meeting between foster parents and parents. They weren't proactive. Agencies weren't proactive in addressing education issues or offering referrals to needed resources. And agencies also had high rates of turnover, which made it really difficult to maintain consistent support around academics. So we'll take a couple minutes here if anybody wants to share anything they found interesting, or is there anything you'd add based on your experiences? Yes.
So I think as a parent with kids in school, like we have, Parent Square and all these activities. So there's no reason that we can't allow parents, foster parents and parents full access to that. I say all the time with the medical stuff too, like we should have access to that because we don't always maybe remember or appointments change all the time and you want parents to attend medical appointments. So that's not about education, but just having access to those databases. But
there's there's barriers beyond us.
Mm-hmm.
I know people say, well, I don't, but they have my address. I can't.
Right.
So, you know, there's certain things that gotta be tweaked, but I feel like that would be such a great resource because the basic information is there, right? Like, oh, your kid is failing this class, or there's this parent-teacher conference, or here, you know. So I think that there's a lot that could be utilized that we're not utilizing. And then I just think that IEPs in New York State should just be in a database that you can access from any school.
What a novel idea. It should all be centralized.
I mean, because right now, I mean, especially with our county, we're doing a lot of KINDAT, we do a lot of kin stuff, which I do have some questions about that and some of these statistics, because I feel like that's another whole new ballgame, right? But like if you have an aunt from Buffalo and the kid's going to Albany and there's an IEP and like that communication breaks down, if you could just, hold up, this is what they were getting there, but that would just resolve so much.
And it's just coming out of permanent care and their IEP gets involved, and it's like,
oh. It's absurd, and I've said it for years, I think you need educational specialists in every like TCFS or whatever, because there's so much.
Yeah.
There's so many things that just could be here, and I just don't understand.
And they're just why they're not. I'll just repeat for the folks online, just a recommendation for one, giving parents access to student portals with information about their child's care, and then two, having some sort of universal system across the state where schools can easily see student records across the state. Ms. Gottman.
In terms of sharing of information, I think that, you know, with HIPAA and other things, it's a lot of, as far as limitations, because people's information is used improperly by professionals. So that's probably why they have some restrictions in that area, in terms of sharing health records in particular with for the children. Certain information can be given to the school, but it has to be information that you share with the social worker only, from what I understand, about the children. You don't go and tell the teachers and everybody else that this child is in care or this child's parent for this or none of that information. So sometimes the teachers are not really aware of the background information, which is not always good, but in order to protect confidentiality, it's not shared. In terms of mandated trainings for teachers, it should coincide with mandated reporting, because most school staff are mandated reporters. So why are they not appropriately trained? That makes no sense. So I agree that, yeah, there should be some training for all staff that work with children to understand some of the things that they may be seeing in terms of behaviors and things of that nature. And that should be as important as making them mandated reporters.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. There's a suggestion here about having, since mandated reporters are trained, they should also be trained around the foster system. My guess is that that is all about compliance with mandated reporting, and what we're talking about is more around the support aspect of things. And I just feel like the state, like, we just haven't gotten there. Like, we're all about like protection, and you know, we could have a discussion about whether or not that's actually what's happening, but that's where their focus is, and it's not on the like understanding the whole person. Like, even when we're at the training yesterday, like, it's a lot of it is like, you're gonna lose your job if you don't do this. And it's not even focused on the human that's at the center of this. So I think that's a lot of the disconnect.
Yeah, because they say, I'm sorry, what they were talking about discussion is support and not report.
Right.
So I think if there were more training,
Yeah,
they would could move more towards the support end of it.
Yeah, correct. Couple key takeaways: compassionate, caring adults empower and support children. School and foster placement stability and support are keys to success. Inter and intra-systems coordination, so coordination between schools and foster care agencies, coordination within those agencies themselves, that matters. Respect for and partnership with parents must be prioritized. Select recommendations. We've already talked about the trauma-informed training, which everyone is like, yes, 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 let's do it. Okay, so I gotta find grant funding to support this coalition. In-school and agency provided mental health support, school and agency academic, life skills, and extracurricular supports. Prioritize parental involvement in schools and partnership with foster parents around education, and generally, as we had such a beautiful example just shared. ensure safe and supportive, stable foster placements, improve data and information sharing at all levels, which we also heard about. This was a great recommendation too, and Milka in the video kind of highlighted it, but create student-driven personal education plans. Because I'm a special education lawyer, I think like IEP, right, and 504, but what if we had an education plan that was driven by a student that said, these are my goals, this is what I want to do, this is how I get to where this is what I need to get where I need to go, where the school's involved, their parents involved, their foster parents involved, all the players are at the table, and then this is a document where we can review and revisit so that when they leave the system, whether they get reunited, adopted, or age out, they have something to hold on to and something that they contributed to that they feel proud of, they feel like they can go on out into life. So I'm gonna just share how to support students based on who we have in the room. Take a look at what you've learned today, integrate that into conversations at your local schools, invite people and systems in to do the hard work. Foster parents, partner with parents, again, we talked about that. Utilize your networks like AFFCNY, other foster adoptive parents, and your local, I don't know if folks, our special education advocate in the room probably knows the PTICs, but utilize your parent training and information center for education advocacy support. They're around the state. I may not be as broad as they need to be, but you might be able to find a local one.
Now. There's so much stuff that
yeah, there's a lot of support.
Workshops online,
yeah. And then get involved in advocacy efforts to push for more support in schools and through foster care agencies. So we're going to do, I think we have a minute or two for one last Slido. Yeah, 3 minutes, great. Scan the Slido or go back to the screen you were on and just share one key takeaway. I'm not gonna go anywhere-ish because I know there's another presentation, but I'll be here and we can talk more afterwards. And after folks sharing this, I'll just share the last slide. I'll give folks about a minute or two to share. And while folks are doing that, I'm gonna check the chat. Not already mandated retraining. I love that, Chris, that you set the co-parenting expectation from the get-go. That's great. It sounds like it's something we need universally. And I will say, Tracy, you're gonna see my email address at the end. If you can email me, just because I don't know that I will have access to this chat, that would be great. I would love to connect with you. So compassion, foster parents and parents need to work together, collaboration. Yeah, I think honestly, collaboration and compassion are the name of the game. Like that's the things that we need that this research showed me and that we need to begin advocating for. So I'm so sorry to cut off the thing, but here's my email address if you want to email me. If you want to read the report online, you can scan the pink QR code. If it would be easier for you, you can scan the blue one and I'll just email you a copy. So you can choose your own adventure there. And with that said, thank you all so much for joining me this morning, those virtually and everyone in the room. Thank you for the rich discussion. And yeah, you have my email address, please reach out. And again, if you are interested in that coalition, it is like still a baby idea in my head, but as it comes to fruition, please let me know if you want to be involved, and I will, you can email me or I can jot down your information so I can be sure to contact you when the time comes. Thank you.